Not long ago, at a donation center on the edge of a small American town, a volunteer was sorting through a box of kitchen cast-offs when she pulled out a plain white casserole dish with a strange black starburst printed across the side. It looked dated. It looked like nothing. She priced it at 50 cents, set it on the housewares shelf between a chipped mug and a bent cake pan, and moved on to the next box. Somewhere out there, a collector who knows exactly what that starburst means would have paid several $100s for that single dish, and more than $1,000 for the matching percolator that was almost certainly thrown away years ago. The dish sold within the hour. Nobody in that building had the faintest idea what had just walked out the door. That is the quiet heartbreak behind almost every piece on this list. This is a countdown of 10 vintage Corningware dishes that are secretly worth real money, in some cases thousands of dollars. And the maddening thing about every one of them is that they look like the most ordinary cookware in America. They are the white dishes with the little blue flowers that lived on every stovetop for decades. The ones that went from freezer to oven to table without a crack, got handed down without a second thought, and ended up stacked at the back of a cabinet or dropped into a donation box during a spring cleaning. What almost no one realizes is that a single detail, a pattern, a shape, a tiny word printed under the design, a code stamped into the base, can be the difference between a $2 dish and a $2,000 one. This cookware was made from a space-age glass ceramic built to survive a lifetime, which is exactly why so much of it is still out there, waiting. And the piece sitting at number 1, the rarest and most valuable of them all, is the very pattern from that donation center story, teased here and revealed at the end. Before the countdown begins, one quick favor. If there is old Corningware stacked in a cabinet somewhere in the house, or already boxed up for the donation pile, turn a piece over and leave a comment with the pattern name and whatever code is stamped into the base, and there is a real chance it can be sorted right here, from a garage sale leftover to a hidden treasure. And subscribe before that box leaves the house, because the list climbs steadily from this point on, and number 1 is the one most likely to be sitting inside it. Coming in at number 10 is the pattern that practically defined the brand, blue cornflower. The simple spray of blue blossoms that appeared in the late 1950s and went on to sell in staggering numbers for decades. Because it is everywhere, it is the single most underestimated pattern in the entire category. Most owners have a piece or two, assume everyone does, and price it at a couple of dollars without a second look. And for the ordinary later pieces, that is roughly fair, $10 to $30 for a common casserole with its lid. But here is what most people miss. The earliest blue cornflower dishes were made in a slightly different shape, with gently sloped, tapering sides rather than the straight walls of the later versions. And those first-generation pieces, carrying the right early backstamp on the base, are the ones collectors chase. A genuine early sloped side dish can climb into 4 figures, roughly $1,000 to $1,500, for the very same pattern that sits ignored in a million cabinets. And a quick word of caution, because it matters. The wild claims of $10,000 and up for common cornflower are almost always misread online listings, unknown offers mistaken for real sales. The real money is specific, and it lives in the shape and the stamp, which is exactly why the next pattern is so dangerous to give away, because its fortune hides in a place almost no one thinks to look. The next piece conceals its value in that overlooked place, and it settles in at number 9, Spice O' Life, the busy pattern of herbs, vegetables, and little printed labels that covered American kitchens through the 1970s and into the 80s. It is the second most common Corningware pattern ever made, which means most pieces truly are worth only $5 to $25, and most people treat the whole set accordingly. But the person who knows leans in close and reads the tiny words printed beneath the vegetables. On most pieces, they mean nothing. On a rare few, the small French phrases spell out names like l'échalote, la romarin, or la marjolaine, and that single detail changes everything. The La Marjolaine 4-quart casserole in particular is a genuine prize, with confirmed values starting around $4,000 for the right dish. Same familiar herbs, same white body, and a gap of thousands hidden in a word most people never even notice is there. The tell could not be more specific. Turn the piece over, then look under the pattern for those French labels, because they are the line between a thrift store cast-off and a small fortune. And speaking of designs that reward a close second look, number 8 is one that quietly built a devoted following. That brings the countdown to number 8, and to Wildflower, a soft pattern of pink and lavender blossoms that Corningware produced from the late 1970s into the mid-80s. To modernize, it reads as gentle and a little dated, the kind of thing set out at a church rummage sale for a couple of dollars beside the coffee percolators. It is a common sight at estate sales too, a stack of soft-flowered dishes marked down at the end of a long weekend, and that is precisely where the knowledgeable buyer quietly does well. The collector sees what others miss, a pattern with a shorter production life than the giants like cornflower, and therefore a smaller surviving population. Individual wildflower pieces trade in the $20 to $60 range, but a complete set, with matching lids intact and the pattern still crisp and unfaded, climbs well beyond that. And clean examples with their original cradles and boxes are the ones that get snapped up fast. The tell here is condition and completeness. The pattern must be sharp, not scrubbed pale, and the lid matters enormously, because a Corningware dish that has lost its matching glass lid has lost a large share of its value in a single stroke. Keep that idea of the lid in mind, because it decides more of this list than most people would ever guess, and it matters again at number 7. Settling in at number 7 is Country Festival, a folk art pattern of bluebirds, tulips, and hearts in a Pennsylvania Dutch style that some collectors also know by the name Friendship. It carries a warmth that the plainer patterns lack, and that charm has earned it a steady, loyal following, because bird patterns hold a special place among Corningware collectors, and this is one of the most appealing the brand ever produced. On the surface, it is easy to walk past, another blue and white dish in a sea of blue and white dishes, and it often gets priced at a thrift store for the same few dollars as everything else on the shelf. But Country Festival was never made in the endless quantities of the flagship patterns, and good pieces trade in the $30 to $80 range, with complete sets and harder-to-find shapes reaching higher. The tell is the pattern itself, that distinctive folk art flock of birds, paired with the usual base check, the vintage glass ceramic body, and an early stamp, not one of the later stoneware reissues. A crisp, complete Country Festival piece is a quiet grail for the people who collect it. And the next pattern takes that idea of the short production run and pushes it further, which is why number 6 is worth watching for. Number 6 belongs to Renaissance, a pattern of delicate scrollwork and filigree that Corningware ran through the 1970s, and it is a lesson in how understated design can quietly appreciate. Because it is neither loud nor floral, it tends to get overlooked entirely, dismissed as a generic old white dish and left at the bottom of a 50-cent bin. There is a certain irony in that, because the very restraint that makes the pattern easy to ignore is exactly what marks it as a product of its era. That is the opening the collector waits for. Renaissance had a moderate production window, shorter than the everyday workhorses, and clean pieces now trade in the $40 to $90 range, more for complete sets with lids and for the less common shapes in the line. The tell is the scroll pattern combined with an authentic vintage backstamp, and, as ever, the presence of that original glass lid. This is also where a broader rule of the whole category comes into focus. The plainer and more forgettable a Corningware pattern looks, the more important it is to actually turn it over and read the base, because plainness is often what hides age and rarity. That rule is about to pay off, because number 5 is a harvest pattern collectors have been quietly buying up. As the list climbs into its harder-to-find half, number 5 is Nature's Bounty, a rich pattern of harvest vegetables and fruit that Corningware produced for a relatively brief stretch in the 1970s. Its short life on the shelves is the whole point. Where the common patterns flooded the market for decades, Nature's Bounty came and went. So far, fewer pieces survive, and demand among collectors has steadily outrun supply. It is the sort of pattern that surfaces once in a long day of estate sale hunting, if at all, and it rarely lingers when it does. Good examples now trade in the $50 to $120 range, and complete well-kept sets push past that, especially the larger casseroles and the harder-to-find serving pieces. The tell is the harvest imagery, noticeably more detailed and colorful than the simple sprigs of the everyday lines. paired again with a genuine vintage base stamp. A collector who spots a Nature's Bounty piece mispriced at a garage sale does not hesitate for a second. And if scarcity is what drives value here, the next pattern is one of the most quietly coveted of all, which is why number 4 is a name that makes collectors sit up. The next one is where the money starts to get serious, and it lands at number 4, Blue Heather, an uncommon pattern of soft purple and blue heather sprigs that never enjoyed the mass production of the flagship lines. For every 100 blue cornflower dishes that survive, only a handful of blue heather pieces turn up, and that scarcity shows plainly in the price. To the untrained eye, it is just another muted floral, easy to leave behind on a thrift store shelf. But good blue heather pieces trade in the $60 to $150 range, with complete sets and rarer shapes climbing higher still. The tell is the specific heather sprig, a purple-leaning bloom that stands apart from the blue cornflower it is so often confused with, together with a clean vintage stamp, and once more, the all-important matching lid. Blue heather is the kind of pattern that separates a casual reseller from a true collector, because recognizing it on site is half the battle. And now only the top 3 remain, the pieces that are genuinely rare rather than merely underestimated, beginning with the pattern collectors chase the hardest of all the named designs. At number 3 is the design with one of the most devoted followings of them all, Floral Bouquet, a delicate arrangement of colorful flowers that Corningware made only for a limited stretch in the early 1970s. Limited production is the key phrase. Floral Bouquet was never one of the endless everyday lines, so surviving pieces are genuinely scarce, and when a good one appears on the market, it tends to sell quickly to a waiting collector. Smaller pieces trade in the $50 to $150 range, and the large casserole dishes with their original lids reach $150 to $300 and beyond for pristine examples. The tell is the full, colorful floral spray, richer and more detailed than the simple sprigs of the common patterns, paired with an early backstamp and a complete, uncracked lid. This is the piece that teaches the whole lesson of the list in miniature. It looks like an ordinary flowered dish, and it is anything but. 2 pieces now remain, and they live in a different world entirely, starting with a category so rare that most people will never knowingly hold one. Number 2 is not really a single pattern at all, but a category, and it is the one that separates the people who dabble from the people who truly know this cookware. The test pieces, prototypes, and short-lived patterns that never reached full production. Over the years, the factory trialed designs, colors, and shapes that were either never released or released so briefly that only a handful ever left the building, and because they appear in no catalog and carry no familiar name, they are the easiest of all to misjudge. To almost everyone, an odd, unfamiliar Corningware piece just looks like a curiosity, maybe even a factory second, and it gets priced for pocket change. To a serious collector, that same oddity can be close to priceless, because the surviving population might number in the dozens rather than the millions. Values for verified test and prototype pieces are wildly variable by their very nature, but confirmed examples regularly change hands from $1,000 into the several thousands, and the truly unique ones set records. The tell is that nothing about the piece matches the known catalog. An unfamiliar pattern, an odd color, a shape that should not exist, and that mismatch is the signal to have it authenticated rather than to hand it over a counter. Which leaves only the piece at the very top, the pattern from the opening story, the single most valuable Corningware design of them all. And that leaves number 1, the piece teased at the very start, Black Starburst, sometimes called Atomic Starburst, the striking black burst of lines that Corningware produced for only a few short years, around 1959 to 1963, sold largely through Sears. It is, by wide agreement, the most valuable vintage Corningware pattern in existence, and its appeal reaches beyond kitchenware collectors into the whole world of mid-century modern design, which only drives the competition higher. It was made in very limited quantities, and it is one of the hardest patterns of all to find in good condition. This is the dish that gets donated for 50 cents by someone who thinks the bold black design simply looks old-fashioned, and picked up without a word by the person who knows exactly what it is. A single black starburst casserole in excellent shape regularly sells for $200 to $600. Complete sets in their original packaging have crossed $2,000, and the matching percolators alone command $1,000 and more. The tell is that unmistakable atomic burst, paired with the vintage glass ceramic body and an early base stamp, because a grail this valuable is exactly the kind of thing worth authenticating rather than assuming. And here is the quiet tragedy of number 1. Because it just looks like an old dish with a strange black design, it is precisely the sort of thing that ends up in a donation box on an ordinary afternoon, carried off by a stranger for the price of a cup of coffee, while its true value walks out the door unnoticed. Look back across all 10 and a single thread runs through every one of them. Not one of these dishes looks like money. They do not gleam or hide in a display case. They sit in plain sight at the back of a cabinet, wearing the same plain white bodies and modest little patterns as the truly common pieces stacked beside them, and the entire difference between worthless and valuable comes down to a detail most people never think to check. A pattern, a shape, a tiny French word beneath the design, a code stamped into the base, the space-age material itself. The people who lose real money on this cookware almost never do it dramatically. They do it quietly, by setting a box on a donation center counter on a Saturday morning, simply because no one ever taught them what to look for. So here is the one rule worth carrying away from all of this. Before that old Corningware leaves the house, before it goes in the donation pile, before it gets a 50-cent sticker at a yard sale, turn it over, read the base, find the pattern, and look closely at the shape and the stamp and any small words hiding under the design. Never donate before you check. The difference between a $2 dish and a $2,000 one is 30 seconds and a little bit of knowledge, and now that knowledge belongs to whoever is listening. One last question, because this cookware has a way of turning up in nearly every family's kitchen history. Which of these patterns is sitting in a cabinet somewhere in the house right now, and, be honest, which one already went out the door in a donation box before its true worth was known? Leave it in the comments, because someone listening is about to go check their own cabinets, and the next hidden treasure on a list like this one might be stacked in yours.